Welcome to Lecture 23, Logical Fallacies in Reasoning. This is the last lecture that I'll be recording for Communication 1110. There will be one more on your lecture guide, but we'll take care of that in a class session. It's relatively short. So I hope you have enjoyed listening to these lectures. In some cases, you may need to go back and listen to them a couple of times, and that's why they're accessible to you. And I hope that you're able to fill in the lecture guides as we go. This one is, we're going to go through these relatively quickly, and in class we'll do some exercises and skits to sort of go over and review the information. But I want you to be aware that on the final exam, about 35% or more of the test is about logic and these logical fallacies. So you definitely want to get an understanding of them. I also want to say that there are lots more of them. There are probably about 100 of them. If you were to Google the word logical fallacies and go to some of the websites, you would find a lot of them. You would find that there are a lot of them that have Latin names that you can't pronounce, and some of them you would probably have trouble understanding. So I'm going to deal with about 20 in this lecture that are the most common and that I think that you need to be aware of. They're commonly used in discourse and as far as the terminology, and they will help you to get started on the idea of how we can make mistakes in reasoning, and that's what the word fallacy means, logical mistakes or mistakes in logical reasoning. And you'll find, as I said, they often have Latin names. I'm going to give you a few Latin names here just to keep you on your toes. So some of the fallacies are directly related to inductive reasoning, and I want to talk about those. The first one is hasty generalization. Now, we already saw that in the last lecture with the example of the meat at Kroger's, the hamburger. If you would, if you've only had 2 examples, you can't make a generalization about all the meat sold at Kroger based on just 2. As you can see, this is what people do when they stereotype. They might, based on 1 or 2 people that they know, say that everybody at a certain high school is a redneck or a snob or whatever. So unfortunately, hasty generalization is very common, and you can avoid it by simply referring to your own experience and saying, of the people I know, this is true, or in my experience, this is true, but don't make it to be always the case, and that way you'll avoid hasty generalization. The second inductive fallacy is false cause, and there are a couple of variations on this that we'll see in a minute. Attributing a cause that is not strong or direct enough is false cause. In the recent shooting in Colorado, someone might say that happened because the shooter was able to get in the back door, and so it was it was the staff's fault because they didn't lock the door. Well, we don't know that. Obviously, that person wanted to kill people, so he would have come in the front door if he wanted to. The door wouldn't have kept him. 2 examples of false cause are called slippery slope and post hoc ergo propter hoc. Now, slippery slope kind of speaks for itself. You know, I always think of skiing when I think of slippery slope. And you sort of, you have an icy hill, and you take a step and you fall down. And that's the idea of slippery slope. The idea behind it is that 1 step takes you over the edge. If you take 1 step, then before you know it, you take the next step, then the next step, then the next step. And before you know it, things are just terrible. We often hear this with very emotional and hot button issues such as euthanasia or gun control or that kind of thing. People will say, if we do this before you know it, the whole country will be in ruins. So, you know, you have to be careful. Now, just because somebody says something is a slippery slope doesn't mean it's a slippery slope. There are situations where 1 step does lead to the next thing, that does lead to the next thing, etc. So you need to know the facts, you need to know the background, and don't just accept that something is or is not a slippery slope without looking more deeply. There is such a thing as called the law of unintended consequences. Sometimes things happen that we're not expecting from policy changes or lifestyle changes. The term post hoc ergo propter hoc means after the fact, therefore because of the fact. And that's Latin, and it is what you might call a time fallacy. Just because X happens first doesn't mean that it caused the next thing that happened later. There might be no connection whatsoever. Often you'll hear, oh, so-and-so got elected and then this happened. And there's no connection between the election and the happening. President Obama was elected in November 2008 and I wrecked my car in December. Okay, now that's kind of silly, but we might also hear stock market prices went up 2,000 points after Microsoft brought out its new operating system. Well, is there really a connection there? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it's just because A and then B happened and that's all. So be careful about post hoc ergo propter hoc. Another inductive fallacy is false analogy, which is easy to figure out. All your life you've heard comparing apples and oranges, and that's a way of saying false analogy. Many times we're told, oh, the United States should have a policy just like some European country like Denmark. And nothing against Denmark, but the United States and Denmark are nothing alike. And if you know anything about the societies, you'll see that they're very different. So just saying another country and we should do it is not necessarily a good, clean, and well-supported analogy. The next one is straw man, and straw man is very colorful. Some of these have interesting backgrounds. When I say the word straw man, most people automatically think they think the Wizard of Oz because they think of scarecrow, and that's really what you are supposed to think, because a scarecrow is very easy to beat up. If you were in a fight with a scarecrow, he's not going to give you very much resistance, and anybody could beat up a scarecrow, and that's the idea of straw man. It usually involves taking someone's argument and taking something out of context, maybe one sentence, and blowing it up and making a big deal of it and making them look stupid. And because it's easy to defeat this little fact out of context. And you see this a lot in political discourse, especially when there's a lot of negative campaigning. People get misquoted or things taken out of context. And for example, if someone says, college professors don't care about students learning because mine said, you must read the chapter to understand the material. I can't explain it all to you in class. That's not what the professor meant. You do need to read the book. And that's not saying that the professor doesn't care about your learning. But that would be a straw man argument. The next one, argument from silence, sort of speaks for itself, but it basically means that you can't prove something from a lack of evidence. I know X is true because no one ever proved X isn't true. Well, that doesn't really make sense. It's okay to steal because the Constitution doesn't say anything about stealing. Or, this defendant is guilty because no one has proven he isn't guilty. Those are arguments from silence. I have allergies. Okay. The next term on your list is non sequitur. Non sequitur is a good all-round logical fallacy, and it means it does not follow. If you know Spanish, you can see the word seguir in there. It is an argument in which the conclusion does not follow from the premises, and sometimes it sounds good at first, but then it really isn't. The premise and the conclusions may be true, but they're not true because of each other. And you can see where a lot of these others would fit into that category. If I said, that girl is not Angelina Jolie, well, that's probably true. But if I said, that girl is not Angelina Jolie because nobody's ever proven to me that she's not Angelina Jolie, well, that doesn't make sense. And that would be an example also of argument from silence. Sometimes non sequiturs are bizarre, and sometimes they sound good on the surface. For example, warming was caused by sunspots or fluctuation in the Earth's orbit or volcanic eruptions in the past. Therefore, it cannot be caused by mankind. Well, just because there's been global warming in the past or climate change in the past based on those other things doesn't mean that there can't be other reasons for it. That would be an example of non sequitur. The next type is statistical fallacies, and these are small sample, which would be like hasty generalization, not enough people in the survey. Another would be unrepresentative sample, where the people who are in the survey don't represent all the different kinds of people. Now, good polling organizations will try to get all kinds of people, older people, younger people, black people, white people, Hispanic people, women, men, different socioeconomic groups, etc., in their polls. But the problem with a poll is all the poll means is that that's what the people said. Okay? You can't prove anything. If you might say, well, right now in the election, one candidate has 40% approval and the other one has 38% approval, that means the first candidate's going to win. You don't know that. Okay? All that means is that that's what the people said. And it's also been shown that people don't always tell the truth to pollsters either. So, you know, that's something to think about. All that a poll means is what it means, and you can't take anything more for it. All right, so we've looked at several inductive types of fallacies. As I've said before, there are many more that you could think about, but now I want to look at some that are more about deductive reasoning or really just incorrect premises more than inductive types of problems. The first one is one that we're faced with all the time, and that's inappropriate appeal to authority. There's nothing wrong with appeal to authority. Authorities sometimes are very knowledgeable, but a lot of times we hear inappropriate appeals to authority. Just because someone's smart about one area, of course, does not make them smart about another area of knowledge. Michael Jordan, very smart about basketball, not too smart about underwear and t-shirts. So, you know, that's kind of a silly example, but sometimes someone who has a PhD in one field will make a statement about about knowledge in another field that's outside of it. So you'd want to be sure that your authorities are speaking in their realm of expertise. Second, a fallacy is false dilemma. And I really like this one because you see this in advertising, especially locally all the time. So some store will say, it's on sale now and it'll never be on sale again. You know, so what they've done is set up a false dilemma. You either buy this thing right now or you'll never be able to buy it again. And a false dilemma does that. It gives you just two options when there really are more than just two. And that happens quite a bit. And usually those two options aren't very good. They're not, you don't want either one of them, but you feel forced into taking one of them. So that's a false dilemma. Leading question is a variation of false dilemma. And it's when a person is put in a position where they can't answer yes or no, or they look bad either way, that they are, either way they answer the question. For example, are you for the government wasting our tax dollars and crippling industry with a program to build a new connector to I-75? Well, you know, how do you answer that? Yes, I want the government to waste our tax dollars, or no, you know, so I don't want a connector. So you're sort of put in a position where you can't answer either way. Appeal to tradition is a very common fallacy. That happens when people say, but we've always done it this way. And, you know, as we've said before, people are resistant to change. And tradition can be a very good thing. I mean, we do a lot of things for tradition, and tradition gives us a sense of values and security. But if the only reason we do something is because we've always done it that way, you have to ask, well, is it a reasonable thing to do? Is it a cost-efficient thing to do? Does it work? And sometimes you need to change. So appeal to tradition doesn't always work. Appeal to popularity, however, is also very common. We all, when we're growing up, say, but Mom, everybody's doing it. And your mom probably said, well, if everybody jumped off the bridge, would you do that too? And that's sort of the appeal to popularity. Just because 51% of the people say something is true doesn't make it true. It just means 51% of the people said that. We can point to a lot of times in history when the majority which is another term for this, appeal to the majority, when the majority thought that something was true that now we know isn't true. So appealing to the majority for something to be true is kind of getting yourself on dangerous ground. Yes, we do in our country elect people and enact laws based on the majority, but we also have in place what's called rule of law to protect everybody, and so that we don't have the majority ruling everything, because that could lead to some problems as well. So the majority is, as an appeal to majority, is definitely a problem. The next one is a fancy word, and you might say, what in the world is hypostatization? And I could even give you some more technical words, but I won't. When you hear that, you should think of something like when people say, well, psychology teaches us that, or if history tells us anything, it tells us, or studies prove. Now, you hear that a lot from people, but you know, it doesn't mean anything. History is the recording of facts. It doesn't teach us anything. It's how we interpret the history. Psychology has a lot of different fields of studying the human mind, and they don't agree. Behaviorists are different from humanists. And studies, when people say studies show, if you do that in my class, I'm going to mark you down, because you have to be specific about what the studies are. Just saying studies show means nothing. So be careful about hypostatization, being vague about these fields of knowledge is basically what it means. Guilt by association. Maybe this has happened to you, that you got in trouble because you just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. I call that guilt by proximity. But just because somebody is associated doesn't mean the other person's guilty. You know him there, and he did something wrong, therefore you did something wrong too. A student said in a class, Hitler was a vegetarian, so anyone who is a vegetarian is like Hitler. That's a false analogy too. It's guilt by association. All right, going into the last section, we're going to look at some traditional, what I call emotion-based fallacies, and there are 4 of them. One of them is called red herring. I love this because talk show hosts do this all the time. You all don't probably remember Phil Donahue, but he was a master of red herring. If somebody brought up a subject that he didn't like, he just changes the subject. And that's what a red herring is. It's changing the subject. It's bringing up irrelevant points to get people off the track. And it comes from the idea of a little fish that's a herring, and the farmers would use the fish to get the dogs off the trail of the fox when they were fox hunting, so the dogs would not trample through their fields. So that's the idea. It's an irrelevant point. It's a distractionary technique to sort of throw people off and get off the topic or the issue. Ad hominem means argument to the man, and it is a type of red herring. It's meant to get people off the issue, but specifically what it does is it insults somebody. Instead of dealing with the matter, it brings up something negative about the other person, which may or may not be true. They may just cast aspersions on them, or bring something up, or maybe even a guilt by association kind of thing. And this is also very common, and you have to watch out for it. Now let me say this about ad hominem, though. If a person truly does have bad character and it's well known, that's not an ad hominem, okay? If they really have done something wrong and that's brought up, especially if the politician, for example, wants to present himself or herself as being a very honest person and their track record shows they're not, that's not ad hominem. It's when it's irrelevant and it's brought up as a distractionary device. The next one is ad misericordiam. That's a fancy way of saying appeal to pity. And if you're a female and you've ever talked a cop out of a ticket by crying, you have used appeal to pity. Now, I kind of did that. I didn't cry, but I said something really sad and pitiful. I can't believe I said that, and I didn't get a ticket when I should have. So you may have used appeal to pity, trying to get somebody to feel sorry for you. And as I've said before, there's nothing wrong with compassion. It is a good motivator, but you don't want it to hide the facts and the truth and the logic that should be there. The last one that we're going to talk about is plain folks. You've seen this many times without knowing what it is. Person I really like is, he's gone now, but Dave Thomas, who was the man who started Wendy's. And he was a very good man. He did many neat charitable things, but he used to have these commercials where he'd be hanging out the window at the Wendy's as if he was just, you know, this CEO of a corporation was actually going to go and serve you a hamburger. And sometimes you'll see examples of politicians. They'll put on their flannel shirt and their blue jeans and they'll go down to the Habitat for Humanity site, and you know, it's a photo op, and say, I'm just like one of the boys, you know, I don't have $100 million in the bank, I'm just like everybody else. And that's called a plain folks appeal, trying to show that I'm just one of the guys, I'm just like everybody else, I'm not this rich elite person. And that's more of a propaganda technique than a logical fallacy, but it's commonly seen. So we've gone through these, and there's a sheet available for you to practice on these fallacies, and we'll also do some skits and some exercises in class about them. Thank you.